Hey everybody, my name's Aaron. I'd like to welcome you to Positive from Negative, where we're taking pain and turning it into power and power into purpose. Because if there's one thing in life that we all have, it's pain. And we're all very powerful people and we all have a purpose. So let's get started, And if you're new here, welcome. Like I said, my name's Aaron and it's good to see you. I'm a professional coach. I work in the spaces of life coaching, well-being, career, business coaching, sobriety coaching and stuff. And so always happy to help. If you'd like to schedule a session with me, there's an email in the bio. Shoot me an email, schedule a discovery call. And if you're returning, it's great. It's great to see you again. I'm really happy that you're here. And drop me a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from and stuff. It's always really interesting to see what kind of reach we have on this. And give me a subscribe or a like if you haven't already done so. Drop me a comment. Let's start a conversation here and start a community. So anyway, what I want to talk about today is one that it just seems really timely, and it's the ability to find serenity and peace in times of chaos and calamity. And I don't have to tell anybody here, I'm sure, that we're living in kind of a chaotic world right now. There's a lot of kind of frightening stuff going on. There's a lot of just things that we've never seen before going on and stuff. And I'm not going to mention any of those things specifically. They don't need any more energy given to them and stuff. And you all know exactly what I'm talking about. And I know for a lot of people, like, this is a very scary time. This is really unsettling. And, it's making a lot of people really question their entire lives and and what they've always known and believed, and really question whether or not they're really safe and secure in this life. And that's understandable. Humans, which is kind of ironic. We are literally in the frequency of change. That's where we exist. And the one thing that we just hate more than anything is change. Humans really like everything to be predictable, and so we can just kind of go through our lives and do our thing and not really have to worry about too much, or really think outside the box too much. But that's just kind of not the case right now. There's so many things going on that are out of the ordinary, that are so just extreme and just really just mind-blowing, that there's a lot of people that are having a really hard time with it. And I totally get that. And the thing that I would like to let everybody know is that it is absolutely possible to find peace within these kind of conditions. And and it's been proven over history that during times of war and famine and disasters and stuff, there's always been people that in those situations were able to kind of come back to center, ground themselves and go and be cheer people up and be helpful and find that peace. Which according to Eckhart Tolle in the Bible, there's a mention of something called the peace that passeth all understanding, which is like the peace that people find when their death is imminent, or when they're in the middle of a situation that's just incomprehensible or inescapable. They find this peace that comes over them and just takes over and really kind of helps them get through that situation in a way that is not terrifying. And I know that's kind of hard to picture, but it's true. And it doesn't always have to happen spontaneously. I know that in those kind of situations, maybe in emergency situations and stuff, that kind of peace may come on sort of in the moment. But it's absolutely possible to work toward that as more of an effort, and a daily practice to get ourselves to that place of peace and just stay there, even though in so many words the world's kind of crumbling around us. And that's more or less what's going on. As we go into the new earth, a lot of these old systems, a lot of these old structures that have been around for so long, the financial systems, government, education, food systems, all those are kind of crumbling. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't care to discuss the ins and outs of that. It just seems to be objectively true that those things are happening, and as such, it's really shaking the foundations of a lot of people, and it's a really difficult time. And so the first thing to understand is that the story that we're always given is the negative one. If you look at the mainstream media, and I try not to look at mainstream media anymore. Occasionally I'll kind of scan the headlines just to see what's going on. But suffice to say, you're not going to get any good news out of the mainstream media. And that's by design. Number one, negativity and bad news keeps people more engaged. It makes them watch more news or buy more newspapers or whatever. And so it's kind of a marketing tactic. And two, and like I said, once again, I'm not going to talk about any kind of conspiracy theories or anything like that, but it is said that there is a kind of group of people that can control everything, that it's their desire to get the general population in this, kind of fear and anger and rage state, because it's easier to control people. When you're in just a survival mode, you're not thinking too much, about like tomorrow even, you're not thinking too much about how you can like grow or expand. You just basically like have your, nose to the grindstone and just keep doing what's right in front of you. And it's so much easier, to keep people like in line that way. And so, as part of this old patriarchal system, that's how it's been forever. It's just been like that. And so we're just kind of conditioned to believe that's just normal. And it has become normal, unfortunately. But the thing that's important to remember is, yes, the negativity and the scary stuff is the main story, but it's by far not the only story. There are plenty of good things happening in the world. There are lots of good things happening in the world, as a matter of fact, and it doesn't take too much to look to find them. YouTube's full of like, kind of feel-good stories and like things with animals that are like, feel good and everything like that, very heartwarming, and and stuff like that. Sometimes just watching something like that can kind of bring you back to center and realize that humans are by and large humane. We're not we're not all like evil and hell bent on destruction and stuff. The vast majority of people are actually very peaceful and really want to just live their lives and do their thing and like be happy and loved and stuff. And so there's plenty of evidence out there if you're willing to look. That's the thing, is like you're generally not going to be given the good stories and stuff. You might have to look for the good stories, but when you do, you'll see that like it's not the only thing that's going on. Number two, gratitude. Gratitude it's a panacea for everything. Gratitude can like dissolve every bit of negativity. Gratitude can put context around things. Like our challenges. If we're grateful for our challenges, it changes what they are. And so, like for me, for example, I always joke that before I came to Earth, the lesson that I wanted to learn was addiction. And so I signed up for the Addiction Deluxe package before I came here, which included hardcore drug addiction, included arrests and homelessness and some pretty rough times and some really not so great things that happened during that time. And it would be real easy for me to like be in a put myself in a victim mode and be like, oh, why did this happen to me? And like if you had my problems, you would have been like, you would have used drugs too or drink too and stuff, and like and I could really go down in a hole with that and stay there. And unfortunately, that's what happens to a lot of people. But the other way to look at that is that we can be grateful for those experiences. I've had experiences through that lifestyle that the vast majority of people have never had, I promise you. And I've seen things that most people have never seen, and I've experienced things that a lot of people have not experienced. And because of that, I can be uniquely useful to other people that are going through that. So, I love to work with people who are in recovery from drugs and alcohol and stuff, because I understand what it's like to go to the pit of hell, with drugs and alcohol, because I've been there many times. And I'm very grateful for that experience. I mean, it was tough in the moment. I mean, as I always say, I'm not going to lie, it wasn't all bad. I mean, there were definitely good and fun times, otherwise I wouldn't have kept doing it. But ultimately, it ended up being my undoing. And it ended up making my life a lot harder, and it made, it just made things at that time just, completely ruin my life, up until I was about 30 years old when I got into recovery. And now I can look back and be like, man, I really benefited from all those experiences. It gave me the experience. It gave me compassion. It gave me a depth of character that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And so, these days I'm very grateful to be an addict. I'm fortunately I've been in recovery for a long time and haven't had to, pick up an illegal drug or anything like that in a very long time. And for that, I'm eternally grateful too. I'm absolutely grateful for recovery, but we can be grateful for our problems. We can be grateful for our challenges in life, because they aren't all a waste. That's what we learn from. And we can also just be grateful for the little things in our life. If everything else fails, you can always look and be like, man, I've got a roof over my head. I've got running water. Just by virtue of the fact that you've got running water, you're already doing better than like 30% of the world's population. If you've got a warm bed to sleep in, if you've got friends, if you've got family that love you, then, that's always something to be grateful for. And so, gratitude really puts things in perspective and really makes us understand that this life is not happening to us, it's happening for us. And we can be grateful for everything that happens, even those things that seem horrible, because yeah, they were horrible, but in the end, ultimately, they're part of the, one of the data points that make us who we are. And that's a beautiful thing. That's the whole purpose and the whole point of coming to Earth, is to learn, to learn those lessons through adversity, through challenges, through, really difficult circumstances. But if we can, not dwell on those things, not like, wallow in them, if we can, get ourselves to a place where you can kind of see that what the point behind all those things was, it really changes our outlook on life and stuff. So, it doesn't really matter what's going on. It doesn't really matter where you are. It doesn't really matter, external circumstances really don't matter. You could be sitting in a jail cell and find peace within yourself. You just have to be able to like think of or remember that like ultimately all this is good. This is all just like a big school for us and stuff, and so ultimately it's all for our development, for our growth. And yeah, there are times that it's hard. There's times that it's very hard, but those experiences are what give us that depth of character that we wouldn't have otherwise. Because if nothing challenging ever happened, we would be very shallow people. And and you see that too. There are some people in the world that have definitely suffered too much, and there's some people in the world that haven't obviously suffered enough and don't understand that and don't have compassion and don't have that depth of character. So we can always be grateful for the things that life has put in our path for us to overcome and to make us stronger. And and ultimately, like, if we can just remember that everything we do here, the whole purpose that we came to Earth was not to have a cushy, comfortable life for our human. It's here, we're here in service of our soul growth. And so we can look at all this chaos and craziness that's going on and like either be terrified and just be racked with fear, or we can look at it as an opportunity to maybe like help our community. We can look at it as an opportunity to see life in a different way, out of that kind of complacency that we were in up until this point. It kind of gives us a new viewpoint on life. And I think what's going to be one of the really beautiful things that comes out of all of this is that communities are kind of popping up around places where there's lack, or places where there's specific issues and or disasters or whatever. It's really bringing communities of people together. So even with all the chaos and craziness, there's already starting to be some benevolent side effects. And so we just have to just kind of remember that this too shall pass, and that ultimately all of this is for our good. And we can be grateful for it, and we can help others find that gratitude within themselves too. If you're tired of dealing with your problems, then go help somebody else deal with their problem. It's been said that nothing helps you quit thinking about the rock in your shoe when you're on a long journey than listen to somebody else talk about the rock in their shoe. All of a sudden the rock in your shoe doesn't seem so bad. And so when we work together, we can support each other, we can be grateful, and we can actually derive a whole lot of good out of all this chaos and craziness that's going on. So anyway, that's all I had for today. I wish everybody another happy 24, and just know that this too shall pass, and everything's going to be okay. It really is. Everything's going to be okay, and we're all going to be wiser, better people for all the lessons that we're learning right now and stuff. And so, ultimately this is all good, and we're just beautiful souls out here learning, as much as we can, getting as strong as we can, and doing the deal so we can, grow and develop. And so anyway, with that, I'm going to let it go, and I wish everybody another happy 24, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thanks.